Number 2. This show has a massive exposition problem. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed that I keep pointing out that characters in the show seem to be spending a very large amount of time just dishing out exposition at the audience. This is the issue that is the hardest to ignore because it's the issue that has the least to do with the adaptation of the source material or with the lore, and has more to do with just how the show is designed as a show, not as an adaptation. But yes, it has a direct domino effect on almost every other aspect of the series. And it starts with pacing. The pacing of the Percy Jackson series is downright insane, to the point where I kind of don't understand it. I don't understand the decisions that were made when it comes to how this story is paced. This show is speed running through its plot, but in a way that just doesn't make any sense. There are so many crucial plot points that are very important for the characters that are just completely gone or brushed over in a matter of seconds. And the pacing issue is not just with the writing, it's in the directing and, oh god, in the editing. The Percy Jackson series has such terrible editing. It is fucking wild how distracting it was, and it affects everything. The characters are largely made worse by the way the plot is constructed, because everything moves so incredibly fast that you just don't have the time to truly take anything in a meaningful way. There is no time to get to know or care for the characters in a way that isn't superficial. There's no time to feel them bonding. There is no time for them to shine because we're blasting through the story at light speed. They completely skip over Percy's training. They completely gloss over majorly important story beats, which ends up creating plot holes. And because the show wants to speed things up constantly to get to the next big bit without even a second to breathe, it tries to avoid showing things on screen as much as possible. Any scene or piece of information that can get cut out to save time is cut out, even if it dramatically impacts the quality or the logic of the story. And most of the time, these moments are replaced with exposition. Yes, Percy Jackson 2.0 has a massive, colossal, borderline unbelievable exposition problem. It is just mind-blowing how distracting it is. I can't think of a show that has such a gargantuan amount of exposition dumps in every single episode. I don't understand how this was approved. The majority of this show, the majority of its dialogue is just characters standing around blurting out exposition endlessly. And it creates a problem that a lot of people have been pointing out over the last few weeks. See, because the show relies so heavily on exposition in almost every single scene, this story is rendered completely tensionless. There are absolutely no stakes in this show. You do not feel any tension trying to be built through the story because there is so much exposition, and the exposition dumps in this show serve as a replacement for, storytelling. There is never anything in the show that feels like it has weight. There is no space for tension. There's no time for tension. So we just exposit the tension out loud because we gotta move on really fast. Like, this show really treats the audience like absolute morons, and that's basically my biggest critique of the entire show. It treats the audience like they're fucking stupid. Every piece of dialogue, every exchange between characters is blatant exposition that doesn't play into anything other than telling the audience what's going on constantly. Like, the characters are being used as an audiobook. They just talk forever just for the sake of having exposition, but it doesn't work. You can't use exposition in a movie or show like you do in a book. There's no sense of mystery because everything is explained to you out loud before you have a chance to discover it. There's no sense of urgency because characters always have the time to stop whatever they're doing to word vomit more exposition, and the pressing deadline of the show doesn't mean anything. And I mean, yeah, even in the pilot, in the scene where Percy, his mom, and Grover are being chased by the fucking Minotaur, he is right behind them, but somehow they find the time to stop running away and just stand and give you verbal exposition for 2 entire minutes. Literally, the chase sequence just pauses. Suddenly, the Minotaur, who was right behind them, is nowhere to be seen, and they have the time to stand for 2 whole minutes and talk, just have some exposition happen, and then when they're done with that, suddenly the scene resumes and the Minotaur is there. How do you want people to feel tension and urgency if they're not absolute? You're telling the audience that, like, no matter what happens, if we want to do exposition, we're just gonna pause the action and do that for minutes on end and then carry on. So no, there is no urgency at any point in the show. The characters never feel like they're in danger because any challenge they have to face is explained out loud beforehand, and they have a solution to every problem before they even encounter said problem. No matter what situation the trio walks into, you won't get to have a single second to discover it and figure it out because you will be told right away. There is no space for intrigue or subtext. Whatever is happening in the show is immediately spelled out to you out loud in a lengthy exposition dump every 2 minutes.
A long time ago, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades agreed their children were becoming too powerful, so they made a pact. Been promising her for years. One day, a demigod would arrive who was fated to go on a...
When Annabeth first arrived here with Thali and Luke, they were being chased by monsters. Agents of Hades. Sisters. Heroes' quests are world-defining events. They have made and broken empires. You're a forbidden child. Zeus might decide to take a shot at you himself. The sky is his domain. Would be serving you.
6.5 hours later.
A few thousand years ago, the god of the wild, Pan, disappeared.
The Oracle didn't say the quest would fail.
Ever since,
We will
without
push
Pan,
anyone down.
Oh my god! I know I'm repeating myself, okay? But god damn! This show is like 90% exposition. You barely get to have any scenes where the characters are bonding and developing and growing, because every time the show gets some downtime where people get to talk, or even in the middle of not downtime, it's just to do more exposition. Like, the dialogue of the show truly feels like it was written by AI, like ChatGPT level writing. Every single scene of the show has an excessively long dialogue section that is just a Wikipedia summary of the Percy Jackson lore.
So I went to the Cloven Council, and they had actually heard of this happening before. And that when a mortal is really close to death, Hades himself can actually reach out.
Bro! Everybody says that the #1 rule of filmmaking is show, don't tell. Well, it seems like the Percy Jackson storytelling rule is tell everything, show nothing. Even exposition that would be made better and save time with visuals are just told to you over and over and over again in long-ass exposition dumps. Bro, this isn't a book. They keep talking about the past war of the gods. The last time the gods had a war, it was devastating. The last time the gods had a war, it caused World War II. The last time. They're always talking about it, but this is a show. You have the opportunity to show it. If you're gonna talk about it all the time to try and put some weight or tension around it, if you're trying to set that up as the stakes and the urgency of the entire story we're about to follow, why don't you try showing it? Throw us a flashback. You're not above that. This show has flashbacks that weren't in the books. Why not this then? Show us a scene that shows the battle of the gods and how destructive it was to the world, so we can have a visual representation of the stakes, of what devastation we're so desperately trying to avoid. Show us the exposition. Remember that scene in Immortals when we see the battle in heaven between the gods and the titans? Do the same thing. Show it. Just fucking show something. Stop telling us about things. Oh my god! This show is so infuriating at times because it has so much potential, but you just spend most of the episodes watching it as it repeatedly shoots itself in the foot and just refuses to indulge in storytelling. Even when it comes to visual action, it just interrupts itself. This show does this thing where almost every time something epic is about to happen on screen, the few times where they're finally gonna show us something exciting, it cuts to black. It's not a joke, this is serious. Almost every time someone is about to do something crazy that you're gonna get to see on screen, the show cuts to black and then resumes after the thing is done. And then people just talk about what just happened that you didn't fully see. It happens more than once, and I think the funniest example of that was in episode 5 in the should-have-been epic sequence where Percy uses his powers sort of intentionally for the first time. What? What? What?
Did you just pull me out of there with that water power stuff?
Are you serious right now? This show will not show you the one time the protagonist uses his powers to save a life, but oh, you will get an extended exposition scene about how he should be careful in the Lotus Casino before entering it. Again, I'm not surprised people were so bored by this show. That's as if in Harry Potter, in Chamber of Secrets, after the first student is found petrified in Hogwarts, instead of having a mystery to solve throughout the story, Hermione just pulls up from the library and goes, "Oh shit, yeah, I read that in a book. It's a basilisk." They can petrify people, but since no one has seen it, it's probably moving through the pipes. Also, by the way, quickly, the Chamber of Secrets is accessed through an abandoned bathroom in the castle, and Salazar Slytherin sealed the entrance with magic, so you can only open it by speaking parcel tongue. Also, Ginny was behind everything, but she's probably possessed. It's like, sure, you could say, well, it makes sense for Hermione to know. She's the smart one, and she's always reading books, so you could assume she read all of that in a book somewhere. It's not unrealistic. Like, okay, cool, but that just makes for a pretty boring movie to watch. The Harry Potter movies have their flaws, and sometimes they're not great adaptations of the books, but all of them are still good movies, and most of them work and are engaging because there is a mystery to solve, because there is so much information we don't know, but we get to find out with the characters as the story goes, which is something that for some reason the Percy Jackson series refuses to do. There's no suspense, there's no intrigue, there are no surprises, there's nothing to look forward to because you already know everything and you feel like what you're watching is useless. The Percy Jackson show basically has the same narrative problem as the one I pointed out in my video about Fantastic Beasts 3, The Secrets of Dumbledore. The characters never have interesting dialogue to build their relationships or their arcs. 90% of the show's dialogue is either blatant exposition or the characters literally explaining the plot to you out loud, bit by bit. The characters talk about what they just did, then they say what's happening currently in the plot, then they say what they're gonna do next, and you just watch them do it. Then they regroup, they recap what just happened, they explain exactly what they're going to do next, and then you just watch them do it. And I'm sorry, but regardless of how much sense it makes for the characters, which, by the way, it doesn't most of the time, it is a really flat and boring way to structure a story. It's not engaging or exciting, it's tedious and bland, and you can't blame people for being so bored with this show. Because even though the story is technically eventful, the show feels like nothing is happening. You watch an episode and just feel like you watched a whole lot of nothing. And the thing that's really annoying with that is that the show consistently ruins its own surprises. The books are full of clever little plot twists that really surprise you and make the whole tale incredibly exciting. It's part of the fun of uncovering this story along with Percy. But you wouldn't know that watching the show because the constant exposition that is being thrown at you in literally every single scene over-explains the plot so much that the twists of the story are explained to you out loud before they happen. The amazing Medusa twist is ruined because the second they meet her, before they even enter her house,
It's a pleasure to meet you, son of Poseidon. I'm Medusa.
Fun, thank you. The surprise of Echidna, the mother of monsters on the train, is ruined because she literally arrives in the show and announces herself as Echidna to the group before she even does anything. The incredible Lotus Casino twist is ruined because Grover explains the functioning of the casino out loud in a very long exposition dump before they even go inside. Percy is told in the second episode that his mom is still alive and trapped in the underworld before he leaves for his quest. Why? He's not supposed to find that out until much later in the story. In the book, he's told by Ares, if I remember correctly, and it's a great twist because up till that point, Percy thinks his mother is dead, and when he realizes that she's being held captive in the underground, you're suddenly hit with the words of the Oracle saying he will fail to save what matters most in the end during his quest. It recontextualizes the prophecy and adds an extra layer of, surprise, surprise, tension, because you realize that not only is his mom alive, but he might not be able to save her anyway. It's a gut punch of a revelation. It's a fucking fantastic reveal, but in the show, the whole weight and tension and significance of this is completely erased because Percy is told his mother is alive before he even meets the Oracle. Percy never gets to learn things in interesting ways or on his own terms with some kind of weight that affects his trajectory because there's always someone in the scene with him to spell everything out for him. He doesn't get that eureka moment where he realizes he's the son of Poseidon because Annabeth just pushes him in the water to heal him as if she just guesses it before him. He doesn't get to figure out the twist that the casino warps time and makes it move faster. Hermes just tells him that, mostly off screen. And if I take the Medusa twist as an example again, I genuinely don't understand how revealing her immediately is an improvement. Aside from making everything around that plotline less interesting, it accomplishes absolutely nothing. Some people try to defend it by saying revealing it right off the bat allows for Medusa to have her whole speech about how she's a victim, but I completely disagree. If you wanted to have a focus on Medusa's backstory, you could absolutely do that while keeping the twist intact. The trio could have gone in without knowing who she was, and as she starts talking to them and taking shots at Annabeth's mom, you could have had a fantastic scene aiming at building tension as she gets more and more creepy and hitting you as Annabeth argues to defend her mother and suddenly stops dead in her tracks when she realizes who she's actually talking to. It doesn't change anything about what the show tried to accomplish with her backstory, aside from keeping the twist intact. Claiming that taking away the twist was the only way to allow for Medusa's backstory to be told is just so weird to me, because it is so obviously not true. Again, it just feels like Rick Riordan made this show, just assuming that anyone that watches it has already read the books. So keeping elements of surprise doesn't matter to him because he assumes you just know already, so he just skips through it. And it's like, it makes the show feel like cliff notes of what happens in the books. It's like it's just a bunch of bullet points in visual media. But even if you've read the books and you know them by heart and you do know what happens, it's the structure of the story that makes it fun. Replacing every fun element of the storytelling with exposition dumps is just lazy. I'm sorry. And let me be super clear. Every story needs exposition. It's like crucial. The problem with Percy Jackson is not only that it relies way too much on exposition to do anything, which is already not great, but the bigger issue is how the exposition is presented to the audience. For a show that relies so much on exposition, they make absolutely no effort to try and make the exposition interesting or fun to be told. It's never used for the characters, it's never used for the story itself. Most of the show is just characters explaining everything to the audience, regardless of logic or tension, again, acting more like a filmed Wikipedia page than an engaging story. It makes the show feel incredibly boring. I feel like Rick kind of jumped the gun by assuming that people will all have read the books and that he can write the expositions like he would in a book's paragraph because, I guess, I don't know, visual storytelling is just not his thing, which makes sense. He's an author. And this is the first season of the show. They're still figuring it out, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Rick Riordan was the wrong guy to make that adaptation. Some authors adapted their own work and did a pretty good job at it. My favorite coming-of-age movie of all time is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. That movie was directed by the man who wrote the book it's adapted from. And it is fantastic, even if it has changes from the source material. Because here's the thing, guys, I don't even care about accuracy that much. I'm gonna be an asshole about it here because I strongly believe Rick Riordan brought this on himself by promising the most faithful adaptation in the world or whatever, but I'm not one of the people who believes an adaptation is automatically bad if it isn't faithful to its source material. Some of my favorite adaptations made a lot of changes to adjust the story in a way that works. Hell, I just made an entire video about adaptations that surpass their source material, mostly by changing them for the better. Changing the story from the books is fine, as long as it makes sense, and as long as the changes are made in service of the story. Most of the changes in the Percy Jackson show don't feel like they're there to make the story better, but rather just to make things go faster, even if it makes the story dumber. And again, they seem to think it's fine because they assume the audience are fucking stupid. And look, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that all the changes made in the Percy Jackson series are bad. I think that would be a pretty dishonest take for me to have. Most of them are bad or pointless, I stand by that, but some of them genuinely work in my opinion, and I think they are great additions to the story. Percy tricking Annabeth and switching place with her at the last second to face the Chimera at the end of episode 4 is an awesome change from the book. It works because it keeps the scene largely intact, but it is a fantastic showcase of his personality and his courage, and he doesn't get a lot of these moments in the show. Even though he is terrified and literally dying from being poisoned, Percy still jumps in front of his friends to protect them without even flinching. That is an A-grade display of his badassery. I don't remember exactly how the Chimera fight plays out in the book, but I'm pretty sure Percy doesn't fight the Chimera intentionally. He's cornered by it and he doesn't really have a choice. Whereas in the show, he chooses to face it so that he can buy some time for his friends. Both versions work, but I think the show's take on it is better for his character. Similarly, I mentioned earlier that the show does give us some flashbacks that are not in the book. Those flashbacks are meant to give us more context around Percy's childhood, his relationship with his mom, and his mom's struggle to protect him in the mortal world without him knowing. I think those flashbacks are good, especially the last one. There's a flashback in episode 7 that is actually a great addition to the story, where we get to see Sally having a conversation with Poseidon in a diner. And it's easily one of the best scenes in the show. It's a very intimate sequence where the two talk about their feelings. Sally feels lost and is afraid she can't protect Percy, so she calls Poseidon in a moment of despair and solitude, and Poseidon immediately comes to her. And the rest of the scene is very simple. They just sit and they have an exchange about the impossible position they're in, and by extension, the impossible position Percy is in, and it's executed really well. You can feel the weight of that conversation. You can feel the emotional implications of it. There's so much pain there, so much palpable emotion between Sally and Poseidon that they can't even bear to look at each other. The whole scene, the whole time we see them together, they do not exchange a single look. And while the scene is short, it is impactful and it adds some much needed layers to Poseidon and Sally. This scene alone makes them more fleshed out characters than any other in the cast, Percy included. I was genuinely pleased by this scene because in a show that is populated by severely underdeveloped characters, having a sequence where we finally see some depth and some subtext was a genuine breath of fresh air. And I love that it reinforces the idea that what makes Percy the absolute badass he is not the fact that he's the son of Poseidon, but because he was raised by Sally. That's dope. This scene is awesome. I really, really like it. So yes, there are some good changes in the story. They're rare, but they exist, and they should be acknowledged. But the majority of changes are very weird. The majority of them are unnecessary, sometimes just stupid, and the only thing they accomplish is making the stakes even more absent than they already were.